Before I start, thank you for coming out. It is a very strange time of year. Not only is it a strange time of day for me to be talking, I'm not a particularly good morning person, but it's also a strange time of year given that it's the last Friday before Christmas, so I'm very grateful to be able to come out. Half of me was thinking on the train on the way this morning that I might turn up and speak for 3 or 4 people, probably 3 of them on my team, so it's a great pleasure to be here. Before I kick start, I wanted to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that we're meeting on this morning, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. It's something we should always do when we're meeting in larger groups like this, but I think it's exceptionally important for an organisation like the School of Life that really prides itself on using wisdom and knowledge from through the ages and trying to apply that to the way we live our lives today. And given that traditional knowledge forms such an integral part of reconciliation in this country, it's incredibly important for us to do this. So, I wanted to pay my respects to elders past and present on behalf of all of us. So what I thought I'd do today is talk a little bit about 3 different things. Firstly, tell you a little bit of the story of how I got to the School of Life and how the School of Life got to Australia. Then I wanted to share a little bit of a snippet of content with you from one of our more popular classes because it's so often better to show people rather than just to tell people about something. And then I wanted to talk at the end just a little bit about why I think philosophy and culture is probably more relevant than it's ever been to how we live our lives today, even though some of us potentially don't feel that in our day-to-day lives. Does that sound alright? Yeah? If it doesn't sound alright, what I thought we would do is start with this. So has anyone been to the David Shrimley exhibition? A few of us? Yeah? I haven't been yet. I'm dying to go. If you haven't gone, go. Before we start, maybe just take 60 seconds on your phone or on a little scrap piece of paper and just jot down something that you've lost or something that you're looking for. Specifically from this morning. So it might be I'm looking for a new network, or I'm looking for a new friend, I'm looking for a husband or a wife. You might be looking for a bit of philosophy or education in your life that you think you've missed. Just take 60 seconds, have a little look. The David Shrimley one's hilarious, use that as your inspiration. 60 seconds. It's going to be a super quick 60 seconds. Alright, we're done. It's like 30 seconds. Does anyone want to share theirs? Yes? You lost your hairbrush this morning. We'll try and help you with that. Anybody else? What they're looking for from this morning? Yeah?
Something interesting to talk about at tonight's work Christmas party.
Fantastic. So I reckon we can do that. Anyone more? Connections.
Yeah.
Okay. Fantastic. So what I'll do is I'll tell you a little bit about my story first, and then we'll get on to the School of Life. So I studied as a civil engineer at university. I studied at Melbourne Uni and I did a civil engineering degree, but I also studied a master's degree. It's one of those strange kids that did both. And I remember vividly sitting in a lecture on bolts. And I'm not sure if anyone else has sat in a lecture on bolts. Anyone? Everyone up can connect up. It's brilliant. So the thing about bolts is that they're obviously incredibly important. We wouldn't be sitting in this building without bolts. But the study of them is particularly curious because effectively what we're trying to do as civil engineers is to think about a very complex problem in a very specific and focused way. So something like bolts is a wonderful sort of microcosm of this thing where we're given a set of parameters, very strict parameters, some of them governed by our lecturers, as governed by the laws of physics. And we're told to solve a problem. And in this case, it's, for this structure to stand up, what size bolts do you need to make it stand up? And it's a particularly focused form of study. It's not about creativity as much as it's about problem solving within a particular paradigm. So then at the end of this lecture on bolts, I'd stand up and I'd walk across campus and I'd sit in a lecture on continental philosophy, or I'd sit in a lecture on history or genocide studies, or I'd sit in a lecture on international politics, where the tutorials were governed by kind of the opposite paradigm. A paradigm where you would challenge an idea every time you heard it. You would challenge it, you would question it, you would debate it, you'd twist it inside out, you'd see if it still held true, or maybe it would spark another idea. And I'd write reflective essays instead of 3-page problem-solving equations. Very different forms of study. But I don't think I could have survived uni without doing both. If I just studied engineering, I would have had a brain that was incredibly well-trained and incredibly well-focused, and incredibly well-funneled into a job, generally speaking. But I would have not nurtured a particular side of me that I guess was my humanity or my human nature. I wouldn't have had the questions asked that I had asked in my master's degree. But at the same time, if I hadn't done the engineering degree, I would have been in a master's degree where a lot of my friends who ended up finishing up a master's degree really struggled with their focus. Where were they going to apply themselves? Be in the field of history or in the field of philosophy, or is it politics through some sort of means? And so for me, I had this wonderful opportunity to experience both worlds, which I think was quite unique. And both requires each other. So the engineering profession required more context, more questioning of ideas, and for mine, the arts degree that I did really required a little bit more focus, a little bit more direction than what I was given. And I felt like both sides of my studies were a little bit limited, a little bit lacking. So the way I aligned this when I left university is I went and worked for an organisation called Engineers Without Borders, which is an incredible non-profit organisation based here in Melbourne that sends engineers and technically trained people into the developing world, mostly in Southeast Asia, to solve some of the most complex problems that we have today around water and sanitation, or international development, or shelter, or ICT, and all sorts of things. And this was a way for me to provide a little bit of creative context and global perspective on an incredibly focused discipline like engineering. And I had one for time with Engineers Without Borders. I then went and worked with an organisation called Small Giants, which some of you have probably heard of. Small Giants is an investment group. Basically, they're trying to invest in projects and businesses that they think are having a positive impact. So if you think about ethical investment, which is a really wonderful thing that screens out a lot of negatives, impact investment, or what Small Giants does, is actually trying to do a step further than that. They're looking for the active positive in organisations that are mission-driven. And it was through Small Giants that we came across the School of Life. And after about 3 years of work behind the scenes to try and work out how you can pick up such a complex and nuanced idea like the School of Life and replant it in a place like Australia, we launched in March earlier this year. And some of you would have seen that because you walked past it on the way in. So the school is really, for me personally, and coming through that journey of study, is a way of connecting two worlds again. It's a way of reconnecting the humanities and the arts and culture and philosophy back into our everyday lives. Not in a fluffy way, not in a nice-to-have way, but in an incredibly practical and rather urgent way to help us solve some of the modern challenges that we all face. Challenges like how to face death, or how to stay calm, or how to make conversations, how to make love last. Things that we all think about, we all go through, but we very rarely have the space or the permission to talk about in really deep and meaningful ways. So we opened the school in March. We were the first school to open outside of London, which we're pretty proud of. And since we opened, we've had about 7 other schools join us around the world. So there are now schools in Antwerp, in Amsterdam, in Paris, in Belgrade. There's one in Rio and Sao Paulo. There's one very close to opening in Seoul. So this movement is sweeping through the world, which is an incredibly exciting thing. It's a secular movement. It's a very playful movement, but it's deeply serious in its content. And it provides this permission for people to explore ideas, generally with strangers, which is an interesting concept. I think in the West, we're often told the best people to talk to about our problems are those that we love, and those who love us, which is often true and can be very helpful. But I think what we find at the school is when we give people permission to explore a topic and we give them a conversation card, like some of you picked up on the way here, the conversation can get very deep very quickly without knowing the other person's name, which is a pretty extraordinary thing. I was sitting in a class a couple of months ago on, I think it was how to make love laugh, and the woman I was sitting next to was in her 40s or 50s. She'd just broken up with her husband after a long relationship. So she started telling me about the trauma that she was going through. And I started telling her about the fact that my wife and I had a miscarriage last year, which was obviously a deeply traumatic experience. And we didn't know each other's names, and the content hadn't started. So it was really the first conversation I had with this woman. It was 5 minutes into the class, and just because we had both been given permission to explore this topic, and a couple of questions to prod us, we suddenly got to an incredibly meaningful and deep place together. And this is our classroom. Sorry, our cafe. So has everyone been to our cafe? Okay, everyone who hasn't put up their hand, we're open right now. So after this, call work and say, sorry guys, I'm going to come in another half an hour late. This Friday, what are they going to do? Friday before Christmas? Go downstairs, sit down, grab a coffee, chat to some of our staff. Our front of our staff are absolutely incredible. They're all around the ideas. They're not just serving you coffee. They're basically all philosophers. So sit with them and talk. So that's our classroom, our cafe. And next door to our cafe is actually our classroom. So you can sit down in the classroom during the day and have a coffee, and at night it converts into a classroom, which is pretty cool. But what I thought I'd do is stop talking about the school and just tell you a little bit about some of our content. This is one of our most popular classes, How to Be More Creative. Has anyone been to this class? Excellent. Do you want to take this one? No. How to Be More Creative is an interesting class for us. We get a lot of people who come to the school who come from pretty traditionally trained backgrounds or vocational backgrounds. Engineers, accountants, lawyers, doctors, professionals, people who have a really high level of education but feel like they're really lacking something in their lives. And I think this class is in particular popular for us because people see the creative world in a pretty stark dichotomy. They think of the world as those who are creative and those who are not. And this is what our education system breeds. And it breeds it in engineers because if you're creative, making bridges fall down, that's not a great thing. Or if you're a lawyer, then you're defined by problem solving within a very narrow paradigm. So what this class is really about, it's using sources like Einstein, Picasso, and great philosophers like Kierkegaard, and it's analysing what is creativity at its core, what is it for us as individuals, but then also, like, aside from the fluffy stuff, let's talk about the creative process itself. Right? Let's talk about that and try and destigmatise that to some extent. Because you're all working in creative professions, you may have seen this diagram before. It's pretty classic. But for people who haven't worked in the creative professions or haven't been called creative by their grade 5 teacher and then sparked a creative career, those people who went into a vocational profession, this is a bit of a revolution, right? This idea that there is not a creative answer, that you don't sit there in silence with a problem and then suddenly the creative genius from within produces a result. This is pretty much a revolution. So we use the class to break this process down. And one of the things that we talk about being incredibly important, and even more important in our lives today, where we're busy, we're interconnected, we're all on our phones, etc., is the question of boredom and the idea of creating space in our lives to have the opportunity to do nothing. Not sit on your phone on the couch, or not watch a film, or not get on the phone to someone, but actually to try and do nothing. And the mindfulness movement is obviously kicking this off pretty strongly, and there's wonderful things to talk about in terms of mindfulness and about mindfulness in school. But this is actually even more reductionist than that. This is just saying sit there and try and be yourself with your own thoughts. So Walter Benjamin is a German philosopher who summed this up rather poetically with this statement of boredom is the dream bird that hatches the egg of experience, which is perhaps a little bit too flourishing, but go with it. And we use this to spark an exercise in the creativity class. And the exercise is this. What practical action can you take to include some unplanned, purposeless time in everyday life? And perhaps more importantly, what can you do to protect that time? Because I think a lot of us can sort of get to the point where we're butting our heads against the wall. I felt a bit like that this week, in the final week before Christmas. And so we go, no, stuff it. I'm going to spend half an hour doing nothing. But how do you make that routine and how do you protect that in your lives? Now, because most of you, I think, work in the creative professions, you've probably nailed this, right? Yeah? So what I thought we could do is just spend, again, 60 seconds. Instead of doing it on your own this time, either lean forward or turn around, because you're probably sitting next to someone you know. So talk to someone in front of you or behind you about this question. So what do you do to create this space in your life? And more importantly, how do you protect it? Yeah? So 60 seconds. Lean forward or lean back. Find someone you haven't spoken to before. Go back to the front, guys. And maybe that's a conversation that you can ask tonight at the yes. Yes. Sorry, yes, that's excellent. Maybe you can ask that one tonight. Come to the class. It'll actually be 5 minutes to talk about that. 60 seconds. This is the free version. So that's one of the topics we cover in the class, and I guess we go through that sort of destigmatized creative process and try and look at the different tools that we can use. All the time referencing, I guess, cultural figures and philosophers that we think have nailed this really well. What I wanted to do, just in the last little moments that we have, is to talk about something that I think is important, particularly for those of us who did not view themselves as connected to humanities in a meaningful way through our studies. So I was lucky enough to study the arts. I'm sure some of you did, given the work that you guys are all in now. But a lot of people view the humanities as a nice to have. They view it as nice to have for the inner city elite. They view it as nice to have for those of us who go to university, but perhaps don't think of it as a necessity or something that can really practically help us in our everyday lives. So what I wanted to talk about here is just 3 reasons why I think this is the case, and possibly why it's the case more today than ever before. The first reason is that, and this sounds perhaps a little bit nebulous, but it engages our shared humanity. This painting is by a wonderful artist called Mary Cassett. It's called The Child's Bath. And I think I challenge anybody to look at that painting and not be able to feel the warmth, the engagement between her and her child, the love that comes out of an image like that. And I challenge anyone to produce that in an Excel spreadsheet, or in a memo, or even in an email, unless you're particularly poetic. And particularly if you're a parent, that you can engage with this sort of a question, this sort of an image, and immediately feel what it's like to take a baby out of a bath and dry them with a towel. It's a pretty special, intimate moment that I think is captured better than anything in this image. So what the arts and the humanities can really do for us is engage with our empathy. And I think there's more than enough commentary around the world today around an empathy deficit, which we perhaps all feel. I think all of us probably felt nice and warm after the Sydney events earlier this week when we saw the hashtag was trending and the response that's been to engage with each other. But I dare say we felt really excited about that and really happy about that because we were perhaps a little bit surprised that was the response, particularly after the events of Cronulla and all sorts of things that happened in the last 10 to 15 years in this country. So I think what the arts and the humanities can really do for us is reconnect us to one another. Did everyone remember when Chris Hadfield came to the Writers' Festival? Did people see that presentation? It was pretty extraordinary. He's obviously an astronaut, he's an engineer, which I love. And this was an interview he gave with Chris Ullman on the 7:30 Report. I said, science, technology, engineering, maths, they drive the economy. We're people, we're not machines, washing machines and robots, we're humans. And to share the wonder and experience of what's going on that is expressed through art, through music, through writing and through poetry. To try and get to the very essence of what's important. I love that he compares to washing machines. I don't know what the hell happened there. The guys are like a rocket scientist, and that's what he is as an example. This is really powerful, I think, for lots of reasons. One, it's great to hear a scientist talk about this. There's often a bit of a unnecessary debate or clash between science and the arts. This is really nice to see. But it touches on that incredibly important thing that all that we do is absolutely useless unless we can connect with one another. And that is done primarily in a really emotional and empathetic way through the arts and through the humanities. The second reason I think it's more important than ever is for perspective and fundamentally for humility. So if the first one was about empathy, the second one for me is really about humility. And what we do at the School of Life is we take a topic like confidence or creativity or love or death, and what we often do is create a bit of a narrative through history. So we look at that topic and how it's been treated by philosophers and cultural people and artists and throughout time. So we might look at Plato's perspective on love, we might look at Kierkegaard's perspective on love, and then we might look at Aaron Sorkin and what he writes about love. So you kind of look at the full cultural spectrum, which ultimately in our classes leads to a moment in time where everybody's sitting there together and they suddenly realise that I'm not particularly unique, which is a really interesting point. When we go through the big life challenges, when we go through a divorce or a marriage or a new job or whatever it might be, we often think of our problems as particularly unique. What the arts and the humanities can do for us is to actually put that in a much bigger perspective, a historical perspective, which is incredibly important because it leads to the next point, which is around humility. I think this is fantastic. I don't know if anyone's read that quote before by Goethe, who's a wonderful philosopher and poet. But this is the idea, again, it gets back to the idea of the creative genius, right? That you can sit in a room and come up with an idea. Whereas, of course, the reality is that all ideas are formed by the collision of two existing ideas or three existing ideas and formed in a new way. So Goethe sums it up nicely by saying that everything has been thought of before, the problem is actually to think of it again. And this shatters that illusion that the only way to be creative, the only way to be a genius, is to actually have original thoughts, which is actually not true. It's about going back through time, back through history, back through the work that people have done before, and using that and reformulating it for the times that we're in today. So I think it's incredibly important for the creative professions, so you can take that one back to work with you. But it's also incredibly important just generally when we're going through life to feel like we're not alone, we are not unique. We're actually intimately connected with one another. And the humanities and philosophy can really help us to see that point more vividly. The third point, and this gets to the conversation cards that you've all seen on, hopefully you picked up before you sat down, which is the permission to explore better questions. And this is something we obviously pride ourselves on at the School of Life, and we hand out those conversation cards to people who do coffee with yourself. So hopefully we're creating lots of new conversations every day. But really what it does, what philosophy and culture can do for us, is give us permission to examine our lives. And this is Socrates, which I'm sure you've all at least heard of. And this is a rather harsh quote. It's pretty much saying if you don't think about your life in a meaningful way, you should die. Which is probably a bit harsh. But the point he was making was pretty profound, and that is that we should be asking questions of one another. We should be having the deeper conversations, the ones that aren't necessarily the superficial ones over the work cooler on a Monday morning about football or whatever. And that's where the life's essence really is. And so what philosophy can do for us, I think, is give us the permission to do this. In the guise of, I'm just thinking about stuff. You know, it's not about me personally, I'm just questioning the world and questioning what's going on around me. And at the school, as I said, we hand out these conversation cards. And there's two examples that I've got behind me. The first one is for you, what would be a good death? Which we like to hand out at 8 a.m. on a Monday morning. We feel like it's a great time to ask this question. The other one that we do is this one, which is perhaps a little bit less personal, which is, does the price of a work of art ever really reflect how good it is? Now, I was going to get you to do this little exercise and talk to one another about this question. I'm not going to do that because we don't have time. But think about those two, maybe take them to the party tonight, ask them with one another. You've all got conversation cards that you can take away, so take them with you and spark some interesting conversations. So they're my three main areas. It was what I wanted to talk about. But what I thought I'd do is just end with a little video. The School of Life produces a whole range of online resources. This one specifically around just the concept of philosophy and trying to destigmatize it for people and reconnect it to our lives. It's a few minutes long. Do I have? Yep. Steps that we play with, but not avoiding the deeply serious side of it either. So this is a bit of a summary slide really, which you can have to read to you because there's no way you read it a little bit. But it's just going through those three areas of shared humanity, building perspective and humility, and giving us permission to ask better questions. The fourth one, which I didn't talk about today, which is perhaps a little bit too deep and dark for an early Friday morning just before Christmas, is it allows us to lead into the sadness in life. The School of Life is not about the pursuit of happiness. It's not about positive psychology. What the School of Life is really about is accepting the good and the bad in life and using culture and philosophy to nurture, to console, to support us through the big transitions that we go through in life. So that's a pretty important point there as well. Right? Ultimately what this does, of course, it helps us with our emotional intelligence, with our self-awareness, and allows us to be, I guess, more fully rounded human beings. So that's all I have. I've actually gone over about 5 minutes, so my apologies if it's late to work. We might have a couple of minutes for questions if you still can. But thank you so much.